Can Caller Post take questions 5 to 12 together? Cabinet Committee D works to ensure a coordinated approach to the delivery and ongoing development of policy on infrastructure investment, delivery, housing and climate action. The committee last met on the 1st of February and the next meeting is scheduled for the 31st of January. Though issues relevant to the climate change can arise across various committees, including Committee C, which covers European affairs, substantive matters of climate action policy are progressed through Cabinet Committee D. Significant work is underway across each of these areas covered by the committee through government departments and agencies and a range of interdepartmental groups such as the Climate Action High-Level Steering Group and the Project Ireland 2040 Delivery Board. In addition, these matters are regularly considered at meetings of the government and in bilateral meetings with the ministers responsible for the issues. Good progress is being made on the delivery of Project Ireland 2040. Through the National Planning Framework, it sets out our strategic 20-year vision for Ireland's future, balancing rural and urban development, and links it with the capital investment of €116 billion over 10 years to meet the infrastructure needs of our growing population. The 4 funds launched under Project Ireland 2040 have a total of €4 billion to invest across areas of urban and rural regeneration and development, climate action and disruptive technologies innovation. The first round of funding allocations under these funds, amounting to €276 million, was announced late last year. These funds will leverage further private sector investment in innovative and targeted projects that deliver on the aims of Project Ireland. The Land Development Agency, another cornerstone initiative of Project Ireland 2040, was established on an interim basis in September and is working to ensure the optimal management of state lands through strategic development and regeneration, with an immediate focus on delivering homes, including social and affordable housing. Housing continues to be a priority for government, and we've seen a strong growth in housing completions and leading indicators such as planning permissions, commencement notices and housing registrations. There's also been a strong delivery of publicly funded social housing in 2018, and the finalised figures will be published by the Minister in the next few weeks. We're very aware of the significant challenge in meeting housing demand and tackling ongoing issues in the housing market. For this reason, Budget 2019 provided an increase of 25% in the total housing budget, bringing it to €2.3 billion. Delivering on our EU 2030 climate commitments and our objective to transition to a competitive, low-carbon, sustainable economy by 2050 are also core priorities of government. We're investing €22 billion in climate action through the National Development Plan to ensure that our future growth is regionally balanced and environmentally sustainable. Budget 2019 provides for a range of provisions to lower carbon emissions and improve sustainability, including more than €200 million for agri-environmental actions through the Rural Development Programme and over €164 million for energy efficiency and renewable energy projects. Minister Burton is currently preparing an all-of-government action plan on climate disruption and is working with colleagues across government to develop new initiatives in electricity, transport, agriculture, heating and other relevant sectors. The action plan will build on the progress to date and set out the steps which must be taken to make Ireland a leader in responding to climate change.
Can I ask in relation to the Children's Hospital overrun? You informed the House that the impact on the capital programme this year would be €100 million and to the tune of €450 million between now and 2021. In terms specifically of the €100 million of projects that will not be advanced this year, have you had the opportunity now of looking across government departments and the Department of Health? Can you specify what projects will not be advanced this year to meet the requirements of reducing other projects to the tune of €100 million this year? I'd be obliged if you could be specific, because there's great anxiety about every project right now, wondering where the axe will fall. Can I ask you, in relation to the Cabinet decision to approve the Children's Hospital, what specific sum was approved by the Cabinet, and did that decision involve an absolute commitment that that was the final figure and that there would be no overruns beyond that? In relation to the capital programme generally, my third question, are there any agreed public-private partnerships to be advanced in the coming year If so, what are they? And finally, in relation to housing, and I think it would be important to give an answer to Deputy Boyd Barrett's question. And may I add to it, it's a question I asked myself last week, if there could be a review of the disparity of the income limits between local authorities, because there are some now that are ludicrously low.
Deputy McDonald. Deputy McDonald. Thank you.
I want to ask also about cost rental and affordable housing. There's been no affordable housing scheme in place since you in Fine Gael and, let it be remembered, in Labour scrapped it in 2011. And here we are in the midst of an unprecedented housing crisis. Deputy Boyd Barrett has given examples of that. Dublin City Council, for its part, has led from the front. It has ambitious plans to develop both cost rental and affordable housing. It has agreed to build 330 cost rental homes, the first in the state on the old St Michael's estate in Inchicore, another 300 planned for Ballymun. They also want to deliver over 2,000 affordable homes as part of the Poolbeg SDZ in Cherry Orchard in Coolock, as well as 325 homes as part of the Land Initiative. However, none of this can be delivered without a scheme that lays out the criteria for who may be eligible, the income levels that will apply, and on what grounds homes may be allocated. So this needs to be urgently addressed, because I've referenced Dublin City Council, but I know this applies to a number of local authorities. The absence of this scheme is holding back projects from proceeding. So can you tell us, Taoiseach, when will we see such a scheme? When will it be published?
Deputy Martin.
Thank you, Taoiseach, for your reply. This time last year, actually, Taoiseach, you were spending large amounts of public money, not just promoting the new NDP, but also advertising specific projects in different parts of the country. We all remember that well. But the project that you personally talked most about was the National Children's Hospital. And you said many times that the NDP was fully costed and timetabled. As you were forced to admit last month, and as the Health Committee has heard, there has been what has been described as a catastrophic overrun in terms of the Children's Hospital, and on the costs that were provided by you as Minister for Health at the time, and indeed in the NDP that you launched only a year ago. So on a series of occasions now you've attempted to downplay the impact of the overrun. As Deputy Howlin has been saying, you've been suggesting there will be a benign reprofiling of the implications in later years, so don't be too bothered about it. But I don't think that's sustainable, Taoiseach, and I think it suggests that you're desperate not to admit the impact of what has happened on the many projects that you've launched. Because if you take the impact of the $1 billion extra, I mean, you said 650. My understanding is you signed off on 1.7 billion prior to Christmas. The Cabinet did, apparently. Some are saying 1.7, and they're dividing it up into two, 1.4 and 300, but it's 1.7 in total. But if you take the biggest elements of that overspend, and you apply that to all other projects in the NDP or all other projects in the health service, why, if there's this dramatic increase in construction inflation that we're told in terms of the hospital, that's not going to happen in other healthcare projects, and indeed across the board? The 61 million that we're told is needed for fire safety in the Children's Hospital, presumably that's going to apply to all the other healthcare projects pro rata. So, Taoiseach, the issue is whether you're willing to be honest with the public and publish the exact impact in the National Development Plan of both this overspend and the rising of costs, which will apply to all other projects across the NDP. You spent hours last year defending your marketing unit on the basis of the need for the public to know what the government is planning. If these plans change, if there's impact on these plans, surely the public deserves to know as well and should be told, because it seems to me that on one project alone, the NDP is a way out of kilter in contrast to what was originally suggested would be the cost. In many other projects in the NDP, I've always described them as a bit fanciful. I know of one hospital that was included because the Minister rang up and said to people, would you ever put a proposal together? If we don't get into the NDP, we won't be considered at all. So you can take a pick of 10 to 15 to 20 years for that project to be realised. That's the kind of stuff that's going on.
Deputy Eamon Ryan.
In your answer that the government are preparing an all-of-government action plan for climate disruption. Can you confirm that that will fulfil the exact same role as the National Energy and Climate Action Plan, which we're compelled to agree with the European Commission before the end of this year on the new EU government's climate legislation? Just as important we have clarity in that that isn't the same thing. Because if it isn't, it is the one we're required to under European planning, which is the key one. And in that, given that we know we have at least to reduce our emissions in the non-emissions trading sector by 100 million tonnes cumulatively in the next decade, and we know now, after the fact, that the National Development Plan will only deliver, at best, a third of that reduction, will you agree that we're going to have to change the National Development Plan if we're going to meet that national climate target, which we're mandated to under European legislation, which we will be fined very extensively if we don't reach, and also which will deliver huge other benefits if we promote public transport, promote better insulated houses and so on. So is your action plan for climate disruption the same as the European National Energy and Climate Action Plan we have to do? And will you revise the National Development Plan to help meet the goals we've already agreed to?
Barrett.
I've already asked the question about income thresholds, but I'll only add this, Taoiseach. You have gone on and on and on about social mix, but actually the failure to raise the income thresholds for social housing makes a nonsense of social mix, because nurses and council workers and people who are on low to average earnings are being whacked off the social housing list, completely eliminating any notion of social mix, and at the same time no affordable housing scheme delivered, so no council can move ahead in reality with an affordable housing scheme. But I want to ask questions about the National Children's Hospital, okay? You just earlier were talking about your own fiscal prudence, and Fine Gael pride themselves on their financial management as against the irresponsible populists you accuse us of being. How did you manage to mismanage an infrastructural project of this importance at this scale so that we have a 300% increase in the costs from the original tender? And did anybody bother to look at the rotten record of BAM, who got it, who were 120 million lower than the nearest other bid? That should have raised alarm bells. But then who built car parks in Holland that collapse, that have had to make settlements with the Cambridge County Council over massive overruns on road projects, who in Ballyfermot built the Ballyfermot Leisure Centre, where there was a massive overrun and then a 5-year-long battle with the council over who was going to pick up the tab for the overrun there, and in Cork, in the port of Cork, where there was massive overruns as well.
Thank you, Deputy.
And Taoiseach, did anybody bother look into Mr. Costello's record on the project board, who had also been involved in massive overruns when he was working for CISK in Poland, which nearly led CISK to collapse? Is it any wonder that he said, oh yeah, there was no problem with BAM's tender, because he clearly had a record of this stuff himself?
Thank you, Deputy. Time is up. Deputy Burton.
I don't think there's any doubt, Taoiseach, now that one of the greatest scandals of your administration is without doubt the overrun on the Children's Hospital. And being honest, people are just scandalised by it and how the figures can move in the extraordinary way that they have moved. I want to ask you, do you have an upper limit on what the hospital will cost? For instance, hospitals are often broadly priced in terms of the cost per room. So if you allowed, say, some years ago, $1 million a room, and allowing for inflation, say we were to increase that by 100% to $2 million a room, we would actually be looking at a cost in the region of around 800. And that 800 million, that is consistent with what we know from figures around the world. Now, are you actually, as Taoiseach, as the head of the executive of government in this country, have you yourself instigated any inquiries? Because there's no doubt This is a disaster for the country. We all want to see the hospital built. I was very clear, you know this as a constituency colleague, that I favoured a site somewhere on the M50 with easy access, a greenfield site that wouldn't have the costs associated with the site that was eventually chosen by the then Minister for Health and announced. But that's all in the past. We now seem to have a hospital where basically the costs are clicking up day after day after day. Have you washed your hands of it as Taoiseach? You were a minister, so you're intimately familiar with it when you were Minister for Health. Can you tell us, have you put an upper limit on what it's cost? Have you compared it with the comparative costs of other hospitals around the world for children? And have you decided to have a proper investigation conducted of what has happened to people's, hard-working people's taxes and the diversion of money from desperately needed projects into what seem to be super inflated costs?
Now, could I just suggest to the House, we're still only at the second grouping. There are 6 minutes left, and the 6 minutes should be given to the Taoiseach, and then the third group will be first tomorrow. Taoiseach.
Just in relation to Deputy Burton's contribution, I think it's important that we all bear in mind the whole issue of Cabinet collective responsibility. The decision made by Cabinet on the site of the National Children's Hospital was made by Cabinet with the full knowledge of the then Minister for Public Expenditure, who's now the leader of your party.
We have 5 minutes left if you want to hear the Taoiseach.
But
deputies.
I think there's a bit of that going around on all sides. In fairness, Brendan. But just to answer Deputy Boyd Barrett's question on income thresholds for social housing, yes, they are under review. I don't have a timeline yet for a decision from the Minister, but they are under review, and we do acknowledge that as incomes rise and incomes are rising, more people become ineligible for social housing, and that's happening at a time when house prices are rising faster than incomes are rising. Now that may change, but when you're at a stage where incomes are rising at a lower rate than house prices are rising, it makes sense to increase the threshold. So I agree on that. We just haven't got the new thresholds yet. I don't have a date, but it's something I know, this work I know that's underway. But a big part of it, of course, is supply, because the solution shouldn't, our objective, as I'm sure everyone will agree, isn't to get more people onto the social housing list. It's to provide people with social housing so they come off the social housing list. And my view is that roughly 20% of our total housing stock should be public or social housing. And at the moment it's only about 10%. So what we're going to need to do from now on and well into the future is to make sure that 20% are 20%, well, owned by people as well. No, obviously people own their houses as well. 600,000 people own their houses, in fact, at the moment. Another 300,000 have mortgages, so 900,000 homes are either owned by people who own them outright or own them through a mortgage. To finish what I was saying, so where we need to be is to have at least 20%, or 20% or more of all new homes being social or public housing. We don't have the exact figures yet, but we think roughly somewhere between 18,000 and 20,000 new homes were built in Ireland last year. That's more than any year this decade, and around 4,500 of those were built by local authorities or affordable housing bodies. That wouldn't include acquisitions and leasing. That brings it to a much higher level. So that's over 20%. And I don't know when the last time we reached 20% of all new homes being built by public bodies, but it seems that's where we are. But it's going to take a number of years before we catch up. On the capital budget reallocation, the capital budget this year is €7 billion, up 25% on last year. We will need to reprofile 100 million of that. It isn't done yet, but we think most likely it will be achieved through deferrals by weeks or months. It won't require the cancellation of any projects outright, and also savings may arise for reasons outside our control, such as other projects being deferred not as a result of any government decision, but because of planning issues or judicial reviews and so on. But I do appreciate it is causing anxiety, and a lot of people around the country feel that the particular project that they're particularly interested in is now being held up as a consequence of overruns at the National Children's Hospital, and that's absolutely not the case. So we will try to clarify that as soon as we can, and I hope that today's decision by Cabinet, a decision to go ahead with the N4 to Sligo, to go ahead with the Castle Baldwin to Cluny Road, is evidence that we are going ahead with these projects. We're not not suspending them. We'll have finished Enniscorthy and Oireachtas here. And I'm pleased to see, that when it came to that project, that N4 project, that the price was reasonable and the price was in line with expectations. It's not overruns everywhere across the board. Lots of projects are coming in and around what we anticipated they would. Also, the works will start on the new runway for Dublin Airport in the next couple of weeks as well. And while that isn't Exchequer funded, it is funded by Project Ireland 2040. So these projects are happening. And I think the truth is, when it comes to any capital project, you really only know what it's going to cost when the final tender comes in. It's a bit like putting a house on the market. You can estimate what it might cost or what it might cost to buy, but it's only when it really goes on the market and you get a final tender in do you really know what a project is going to cost. In terms of new PPPs, there aren't any new ones that I'm aware of, but I would anticipate the M20 will be a PPP. They worked well for previous road projects, but there aren't any that I'm aware of. The amount approved by Cabinet for the Children's Hospital was the figure is 1.446 billion, but that's not actually the full Exchequer contribution. The Exchequer contribution is 1.343. It's slightly lower because the car park and retail elements are included in that figure, and they'll be commercial. It's also anticipated that there'll be some funding raised from philanthropy for the Children's Research Centre, and that also includes VAT as well. So part of that is circular. The figure that I've seen people use, which is 1.73 billion, includes other costs that are separate to the capital cost of building the hospital. For example, the cost of integrating the three hospitals into one, that's current expenditure. They're also including in that the electronic health record, which we would have been doing anyway. It's already being done in the maternity hospitals. We'd be doing it anyway, even if we weren't building the Children's Hospital. And also, interestingly, includes 39.98 million, which was spent on the Mater campus, largely by governments prior to 2011 or 2012. So when people use that figure of 1.73, they're including expenditure that would have arisen anyway, even if the new hospital had never been built. They're including VAT, and they're also including costs at the Mater incurred by a previous government hospital that was never built.